Kamusta kayo guys? Okay ba kayo? Hello? Ayun, pagpasensyahan nyo na yung aking background at hindi ko nalagay yung aking blue background dahil I'm joining from my browser. Ayan, hello Haya. Hello, medyo mini reunion nga itong ating event actually. Mga familiar faces and names. Ayan. Sige, so to start things off, let's hear some opening remarks from Tanya Hamada, a member and of the steering committee of the World Movement for Democracy and the founding member of the Young Public Servants. Tanya?
My internet is unstable, so if I suddenly put off my video, I will continue. So good afternoon. Oo nga, mini reunion. I know many of you. I look forward to getting to know more of you. First of all, thank you to the World Movement for convening this conversation. Is something where a lot of advocates, when they find themselves in situations either because of political transitions or extra constitutional transitions, you find yourselves in positions wherein you're able to either join government or run for public office. And therefore, you become that's why the term became crossovers. But essentially, the more you think about it, it's really because advocates, activists, you can't help do what needs to be done. So if the space is open for engagement, whether you're inside or outside, it is the nature of activists or advocates to take the opportunity. What the World Movement for Democracy did, it was one of the very first global actors to take, to take and listen and take cognizance of this phenomenon wherein activists and advocates do what has it was the Philippine experience actually. I was still a young, the Philippines in particular, it was a conscious effort of a collective to join government as the strategy for reform. So it was not only because of the opportunity that has happened for many, sorry, nalalaglag daw yung aking voice. It has happened for previous generations, but at least for our time, it was a deliberate decision. So this interest by the World Movement translated into what became the Crossover Initiative. And so many of you here, your stories will be very, very important in how the World Movement will move forward in defining how it wants to support those like you who have decided to join the arena of governance and politics. So the World Movement is a loose movement. That's why it's sorry about that. Let me end it. So essentially, it's just saying that welcome to this conversation this afternoon, and we look forward to listening to all your stories because it's going to contribute to a lot of youth initiatives all over the world. Thank you and good afternoon.
Thank you so much, Tanya. Ayun, actually, marami sa atin nga yung iba-iba yung instance, yung conditions sa pagsali natin sa government in one way or another. And it will be very fascinating and interesting to hear the different stories that we'll hear later on. Ayan. Sige, so moving on, we'll hear some remarks from Ryota Jonen, the director of the World Movement for Democracy. But unfortunately, he won't be able to join us this afternoon, so he sent some pre-recorded message. Let's hear it from Ryota.
Hi, welcome everybody. I'm Ryota Jonen from the World Movement for Democracy. The World Movement for Democracy is a global network of civil society activists, parliamentarians, thought leaders, and the funders who are committed to advancing democracy around the world. Since 1999, we have facilitated networking, among democracy advocates and supporters and convened a discussion and workshop on democracy in different parts of the world. We actively empower democracy movements to engage in cross-regional solidarity, as well as share knowledge, support, strategy with one another. We do so in the three main thematic areas: defending civic space, promoting inclusive governance, and strengthening democratic leadership, focusing on young people. Under the second pillar, promoting inclusive governance, the World Movement spends 2 to 3 years from 2017 and 2020 studying how civil society leaders were moving to government in order to push reforms within and make governance more inclusive and responsive. We also looked at what experience they have in doing so. We are calling those people moving from civil society to government crossovers. Finally, in March 2020, the World Movement launched the Crossover Initiative, first, to document those crossover experiences. Second, to share their experiences among who have crossed over. And then finally, empower young people to consider crossing over and equipping them with knowledge of the past experience. Since then, World Movement has continued to build its crossover networks and connect pro-democracy crossovers across the borders to share lessons learned. The Crossover Initiative page is on our website. I encourage you to visit our website, www.movedemocracy.org, to find more. The politics is very different from civil society activism. Today's discussion, from activism to governance, experiences and the practices, bring together former, current, and the future young crossovers to discuss key strategies to institute reforms focusing on security sector, gender equality, and social services. Particularly, we want to stress the importance of policy development and implementation. We also want to draw your attention to how you can engage with generation after you and guide them with your own experiences. We welcome your questions and comments throughout today's discussion so that we can actually follow up and engage with you further on the Crossover Initiative. I want to give special thanks to Tanya Hamada, a member of the World Movement Steering Committee from the Philippines, and Ding Quintos de Les, both widely known crossovers in the Philippines, for sharing their wisdom and the guidance as we thought about how to organize today's discussion. We also appreciate the partnership Young Public Servants, Lila, Justin, Abby, Mara, Victor, and Aya. I want to give a special big shout out to the World Movement team, Megan Barker and George Todorovich. We know that democracy in the Philippines are under attack, but the dictatorship style of governance that we have seen in your country for the last 4 years has not stopped you from making Philippines more democratic and freer. You have shown in many ways your resilience, and opportunity will come sooner or later. So by strategizing and equipping ourselves with necessary skill set, it's time to prepare for that moment to come. So thank you very much for your participation in this discussion, and I look forward to learning from you and working with you in the future.
All right, that's Ryota Jonin, Director of the World Movement for Democracy. And it's heartening to note that merong malawak na global network ng crossovers. And it would be interesting to see how the Philippine experience compares with our colleagues in other parts of the world. And yun nga, yung mga political crossover, we have a big political transition that will happen next year. So it will be an exciting time to see as well ano yung mga crossovers that will be happening in the months to come. Okay, so we can now move on to our first main discussion, our opening plenary. And we're very lucky to have with us someone who has great experience in both in government as well as in the private sector, in civil society. And so we have Julia Andrea Abad, Executive Director of the FEU Public Policy Center. Actually, my boss. I used to be with the Policy Center with her a few years back. And Julia is also the founding member of Young Public Servants. As you all know, dati din siyang nasa Aquino administration as former Secretary of the Office of the President, Presidential Management Staff. So let's give it up for Julia Abad. Julia, nice to see you.
Hi, JC. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Sorry, if I turn off my video and you see some anime figures as my profile, I'm using my daughter's laptop, so I apologize in advance. Thank you for spending your Saturday with us, and I hope I can do justice to your decision to work on a weekend rather than do something infinitely more relaxing. Just as an aside, when we started YPS, we were a bit concerned that it was all the same people that we used to see. So we had hoped that as YPS grew, it would include people, that we didn't know or were not in our usual circles. And seeing as many of you are a lot younger than me, there are a fair number that I know, but there are also a fair number that I don't. So I guess that shows that we are actually getting somewhere and that we have actually grown to include, people that we'd like to reach. They asked me to share some quick reflections on my crossover journey. So I will try and speak as briefly as possible so that you can ask your questions and that this part of this afternoon will be more relevant to you. As some of you know, I was raised by two former student activists turned civil society leaders and then public servants. And as a young person, I thought I knew enough about the heartbreak of their chosen career paths to make sure that I avoided it at all costs. I majored in communications. I did my college internship at Cosmo magazine. And finally, when it came to having to find a job, I chose to work as a writer at a corporate foundation in one of the country's larger conglomerates. Despite this early conviction that I would avoid the public sector at all costs, as you might know, I have in fact spent the greater part of my working life in government. First, as executive assistant to former Department of Social Welfare and Development Secretary Dinky Soliman, and then as chief of staff to Senator Benigno S. Aquino III, and then later on as the head of his presidential management staff. Both my government stints were a result of public clamor for a change in leadership and in response to allegations of corruption and the deliberate undermining of democratic institutions. In both instances, there was an incredible number of young people who joined government with me, all eager to be part of the change that we had sought from the streets. So they asked me to share some reflections on being on both sides of the fence, so they speak. So first, advocates join government because we see it as an opportunity to actively drive the change that you have committed yourself to. As a martial law baby who grew up in a household where books were wrapped up and the title pages were ripped off, and where my parents would routinely disappear without word as to when they would resurface, the defense of democracy was very personal to me. It was the threat of a return to those days that drove me to join government in 2001 and then again in 2007. Most advocates will join for a set of principles, and these principles will become the deciding factor for how long you will stay in government. When the government or the administration no longer upholds these same principles, then it is time to give up power and return to the streets. As in the case of the Hayaten, who joined the post-Estrada government and then resigned from the Macapagal Arroyo government in the wake of the Hello Garci scandal. My second government stint as part of the Aquino cabinet saw the advocates in government stay for the entire presidential term. It was no mean feat, and sorry for the shameless plug, a testament for how faithful that administration stayed to the principles that advocates joined to uphold: democracy, good governance, and an inclusive, participative public service. The bar is, of course, different for everybody who goes into public service. Every government has its share of pragmatists as well as idealists. And the tension between them ultimately shapes the collective conscience of that administration. Second, as bureaucrats, advocates turned bureaucrats, we learned to become professionals. We traded in, our advocate clothes for civil service approved outfits and clothes, business-like shoes. In order to gain the respect of our colleagues, we had to count ourselves among them. Some of you might know this. Ayan, si Abby uniforms. Our former boss, Secretary Soliman, who was known for her unique and rather outrageous fashion sense, and who shocked many civil society colleagues by initially accepting a government position back in 2001, would make it a point to be early for flag ceremony every Monday and actually wear the DSWD uniform, to the great distress of the new staffers who also had to wear it with her. During our first few months at DSWD, the newbies at the office of the secretary had to be taught how to write minutes of the meetings in the proper format, not something we had to do before, as well as what the difference between writing a memo for and to someone was. So 4 is for somebody important, this 2 is somebody less important than you. 10 years later at PMS, I was still learning, this time how to correctly format appointment papers for cabinet secretaries and who to vet documents with before asking the president to sign off. In both cases, lessons were the same. As a representative of your government, you were never to be shabby or uninformed or sloppy. Whether one was giving instructions on behalf of the secretary or the president, being known for your ability to do the task that you were asking others to accomplish gained you respect. Best foot forward, always. As advocates, we joined government committed to very specific ideals, and we were determined to see it through, whether it was reproductive rights, budget transparency, tax reform, or a sustainable peace agreement. We learned to work with bureaucrats, we learned to work with politicians. Well, we learned to become bureaucrats. We learned to work with politicians. And in fact, in many ways, I think we managed to educate each other. So I guess I will end with a few anecdotes that show this. So first, I will tell you the story of a cabinet secretary who joined as a very idealistic former member of the academe. And I think it shocked him at first how politicians would recommend candidates to positions just based on, bata ko to, friends kami, helpful siya sa akin. So the instinct, of course, as an upright citizen, former advocate, is just to say, no, that's ridiculous. But of course, that didn't really get that cabinet secretary anywhere. So in fact, he learned, congressman, these are the qualification standards for that position. We don't want people to think that you're recommending somebody who is not qualified, right? Because I'm sure you, just as much as we want someone who is qualified, so do you. So these are the qualification standards, and why don't you send us candidates that meet these standards? And, I guess maybe since you appeal to that side of them, they would, and eventually that cabinet secretary learned how to live harmoniously with politicians and maybe even raise their standards a little bit. Another secretary, well, I guess obviously you know who it is, presented to a group of legislators a plan for national roads and highways, and showed them, how these infrastructure projects would benefit different municipalities by connecting them, etc. His real purpose was really to keep them from diverting the national highways into locations where they weren't needed, or into specific barangays which they wanted to help. And so by showing them an overall plan and really educating them on the benefits of that plan, he developed some ownership of it and minimized lobbying for the creation of random infrastructure in different places. I guess my last one has to do with some meetings that we convened to talk to legislators about some priority measures. And these legislators, coming from years and years of experience of being called to Malacanang and being given brown envelopes, they would come and look around thinking, are you going to give us any envelopes? So we would discuss with them, feed them very nice lunch, and then ask them for their opinion. And then at the end, they would leave, and as they waited for their cars, they would kind of look around and say, "Oh, so you really asked us here just so ask for our opinion." And we would tell them, yes, because we want to know how you think. We want to explain our side, and want to make sure that the bill is reflective of things that we agree on both. And so they would look around, and nobody would make mention. And later on, the comment would be, so there's really no envelope, none. But, and some of them would say, oh, so you really just called us because you want to know what we think? Yeah, and it was something novel, that they were not asked for their opinion before. They were just given this is how you vote, finished. So in that way, you get to show them that it's possible, and two, they get to see that it's also possible. So I guess it's being able to be in each other's shoes. And so I think I will stop here because I want to give you some space to ask your questions, so that again it's as relevant to you and at whatever point in your careers you are at. So I'll stop. I have more stories, but I think maybe that's enough for now.
Ayan, thanks so much, Julia. Actually, maganda yung mga kwento mo, and later on tingnan natin ano yung mga tanong ng mga ating participants. And right now, actually, we're open to your questions. We have a Q&A session. This is your chance to ask your burning questions to Julia. Ano yung mga experiences niya, ano yung mga challenges. Feel free to post them do sa chat box dito sa Zoom. Or if you'd like, you're free to ask your question yourself. We'll give you the floor. Sige, do you have any questions, burning questions for Julia?
Ang corny niyo naman.
Ayan, ito na. Paparating na. Ayan, ito si Victor. Meron siyang tanong, can you share a concrete example where you had to compromise your values just to achieve the common good? Meron nga ba, Julia? Hot seat.
I'm not sure about compromise your values, but definitely there are a lot of instances where I had to work with people that I would rather not work with. But then again, is my personal pride really more important than being part of something that I think will generate impact for more people beyond me. And I guess, yeah, I think that's it. The rest of my dilemmas, there was another question here about when did you know that it was time to leave government? The first time that I left government, it was actually not because, I had problems with the way it was being run, or I left government in the first instance to go to school. I had been executive assistant for 2 years, and I thought it was time to sort of try and move forward in my career. In the Aquino administration, there was a time that I wanted to resign because I had just given birth. And it was tough to be sort of breastfeeding and pumping milk in mga random hotel rooms where we would have cabinet cluster meetings. Or, I would wake up in the middle of the night, nagbe-breastfeed and nagbe-vet nagsisign off on briefers. It was very, very exhausting. But aside from there, that having to maybe work with those that, I would have rather not. I didn't really have any sort of conscience battles of the sort.
Nice, nice. Sige, habang inintay natin yung ibang questions from the other participants, gusto ko sana itanong din sa iyo, Julian, na kasi many people come into government, including myself, nung pumasok ako sa NEDA, very idealistic, kala natin na madali lang yung reforms kapag nasa gobyerno na. Pero once we're in government, parang nawawala yung idealism for many of us. Ano yung mga most frustrating things for you, and how do you keep the morale of advocates in government up? Considering na ang daming ang art of politics, compromise, and you learn pretty early on how to deal with those. Pero how do you keep the fire burning, kumbaga, among advocates who find themselves in government?
Siguro, well, I think more than disillusionment, siguro, I see government more of a reality check rather than something that should discourage people. Kasi it's one thing to study how things should be done and to write about it and read about it. But it's really another thing to see it. And I guess the only way that the fire really keeps burning is to see that it works. So I guess for me, my second government stint, I was lucky in that, even if there were probably moments where, like for example, I think there were some budget transparency measures that were introduced a lot with the team of Sinatanya. They worked on that. And then yung reaction, of course, the reaction ng mga congressman is, bakit ba kailangan sabihin yan? Ano ba problema niyo? Dati pa secret. I mean, it was really not something they were used to. And then when problems came up later on, they said, kayo kasi, bakit ba nag-encourage kayo ng transparency na yan? Pero in the end, people appreciate it. It's recognized. So, and you have to think of it as part of education, I think. Before I answer, wow, there's a lot of questions. I have a super favorite story that I will tell you about being disillusioned and educating. So a friend of mine who used to be the Commissioner of Customs, he was also very active in education before and after government. He was active in an education foundation. And he was surprised to find that one of the bigger smugglers was also a supporter of education. He funded classroom buildings and stuff. And so one time he was brought there to the place of that smuggler. And then he said, "Sir, bakit kailangan magbayad na kayo ng tax?" Kasi, and then he explained. And then I think they were trying to find common ground. And they both connected, that they were supporting education initiatives, building classrooms. And so he said, sir, instead of putting your money in, building classrooms, magbayad ka na lang ng tax. Kasi doon din naman siya napupunta. Magbibuild din kami ng classroom. So things like that. It's funny and it sounds a bit absurd maybe, and in situations certainly where, you feel like there's really no good happening. Parang hindi totoo. Pero imagine that opportunity to educate, Customs Commissioner kayo, educate a smuggler. And somewhat, they kind of, it's one step forward. So I guess, one thing to see is it's really a continuing process. Mon Jimenez was always saying, this is not a story that will ever end in your lifetime. It's a story that you build in your part to So just make sure that the part that belongs to you is a good part, but it's not the ending that you're going to write. So, okay, I'm gonna.
Nice. Ito actually, ang dami na nating mga tanong dito, no? Si Justin Muyot, meron siyang follow-up question on working with people you'd rather not. Are there any boundaries or limits you set when dealing with them? Tanong niya.
I think, of course, like doing illegal stuff. No, right? Taking money, no. And I think it's very important that when you enter government, you make that clear. Because actually, people will say, "Oh, you work with the president." Siguro everybody was trying to bribe you. Nobody, to be honest, nobody did. Because I think they know what kind of person you are. So even nga yung mag-follow up lang ng appointments or mag-follow up ng schedules, the people who are really close to me, my friends, my family members, they know not to ask me kasi parang awayin ko sila or unless it's really important or it's the whatever or that needs attention, they will not ask me because they know that that's not what I'm there for. And so that's something I appreciate. And I think if you make that clear about yourself, you will not have to keep repeating it while you are in government.
Nice. Itong si Edna Ramirez, sabi niya, "Hi Miss Julia, what do you hope for in the next administration for people who would stay in government or would like to come back to government post-elections? What's your message to them?" So I guess tanong ng marami sa atin yan na babalik ba yung iba sa atin or worth it pang bumalik? Julia.
I think personal decision naman yung pagbalik sa gobyerno. I would hope that, aside from being a government that is committed to anti-corruption and really good government, I think at least personally, what I miss is seeing competent people, is to feel like there's somebody in charge who knows what they're doing. That's really what I'd like to see in government. And if any of you would like to go back to government so people can be in charge and so there can be some intelligent public servants out there, or at least there are. I have to say, I have given a few talks on gender to Civil Service Institute, some government agencies, and there are a lot of people who are they ask intelligent questions, they know global trends, so I think the quality of work that we saw when we were there, nandun pa naman sila. It's just that they're not being tapped or appreciated. So I think it will also be a relief for the bureaucrats that we worked with, who appreciated sort of competent public service, to have more more of their life in government.
Yes, actually that brings to mind yung personal decision ko rin to join government in the first place. I was invited by Secretary Balisacan at that time. Meron kaming journal article na sinusulat. Tapos sabi niya, "Why not join NEDA?" Parang sabi ko, parang wala sa plano ko yan, sir. Pero parang seeing that he was the head of NEDA and there was parang you look up to him before government. So parang he's an established academician before and he has integrity. So parang that kind of pulled me in to government service at that time then. So I guess we need to see more of that nga. Parang we want to be inspired by the people in government. Alam natin na they will deliver talaga. Okay, we have more questions pero unahin natin si Victor Platon. He's raising his hand. Go ahead, Victor.
Yes, hi. Good afternoon, Julia, and good afternoon, JC. My question is, if I saw kasi in the chat box that a lot of the questions and the conversation are moving around principles. And if I may interject a question about practicalities of working in government. especially if one of our objectives here is to convince young people to consider working in government. There is a misconception probably that if you work in government, compensation would be lower than if you work for corporate or another or in other sectors. What other misconceptions out there can you correct, Julia, based on your experience, and you too, JC, based on your experience in working in government service? Because at the end of the day, you know, a lot of young people, in as much as they have the idealism, the temptation to buy more clothes and shoes and travel might stop them from, you know, from working in government because of some of these misconceptions.
So I spent all my salary on shoes and clothes. I managed. Well, I think it depends on the government pay is much better now than when we were there. That's one thing. But I think it depends also on what your comparative is. If you compare it with hardcore private sector, there's really no contest. So I think all over the world, yan, I guess, unless you work in Singapore, um, private sector will always outdo government. So I think if you will compare that, government is always a little bit of a sacrifice. Kaya you will find either very seasoned private sector guys who don't need the money in government, or really young idealistic people who don't need the money either. In between, it's really a conscious choice to earn less than you might if you did something else. But in the end, it's not well. I think now also the salary structure has improved a lot, so I think it's not as much as a sacrifice as it was when we went there. So that's really not a misconception. It's quite true, but it's not as bad as people think.
Sabi dito sa comments, SSL talaga ang nagdala. Thank you Pinoy daw. So ayun.
Jace, there's a question here I want to answer because I think
Yes,
it's important. It's by James Roman. Can you talk a bit about the temptation to continuously try to distance public service from politics? Of course, everything is political. Nothing can be rid of power dynamics, but it is quite frustrating to be automatically labeled as one with a hidden agenda rather than a genuine public servant. I like this question because it's a real struggle. Hi, James.
Hi, Julia. Hello.
You want to add? You can add, please, if you want to
Not
expound.
at all. I think mahaba na po yung question. I might be taking the airtime of other questions. So I don't want to add po, man. That's fine.
No, I like that question because I think even some hardcore advocates will view politics or politicians with suspicion. And as a caveat, I have to say, so I'm the children of career politicians. I'm the child of career politicians, so I have a little bit of that lens. But I think just to dismiss politics as always bad, we miss out on two things. One is the opportunity to learn how politics can also be good, right? Because politics is really looking at resources and to see how you can make use of them, what is available to you in terms of network and other resources to achieve what you like. And what you want to achieve can be good or bad. Unfortunately, the maneuvering that is associated with politics is usually used for not very good things. And I think that's partly because the ones who would use it for the good are so averse to using it that they don't know how. So me right now, whenever you talk about, policy reform, there's always talk about the technical details of a policy or how to communicate a policy. And I always say, why do you not map out the stakeholders that are important in that policy? And how do you leverage what you have to make sure that this policy goes through? Because the most beautiful policy is useless if it doesn't go through. And what makes it go through is how familiar you are with the political situation and how you can use that to your advantage. And don't, I mean, using the situation to your advantage is not a bad thing. If you're not doing anything illegal, you know, it's just if you're not, yeah. And I think that to always, that's one, that you miss out on the opportunity to learn how to use politics to your advantage, and two, you really miss out on the opportunity to encourage the very few politicians who are actually out to do good. So imagine the career politicians who, you know, the traditional politicians will automatically dismiss those good politicians as, you know, huwag nyo nang tulungan yung mga yan kasi papahirapan lang tayo. Gusto pa nila ng transparency, gusto pa nilang tulungan magkonsulta ng kung sino-sino. Pwede namang gawin lang kung anong gusto natin. So, nahirapan na sila in their traditional circles to do what they want. But when they appeal to the advocates, you know, to sort of believe in them, to explain that this is what they're trying to do, they get exactly seen in that lens na baka naman, you know, you've sold out. You're a politician, so maybe you want to use us. So they're caught between a rock and a hard place, right? They're trying to do good. There are very few good politicians. And nobody really believes that they are good politicians. Everybody thinks they're shady because politics in itself is shady. So I think that when you don't look at politics refuse to see politics as something that can be a force for good, you miss out on those two very big opportunities that I think will be sort of game changers, not only in elections, but in getting through some very critical reforms.
Thank
That's a
you,
good,
Julia.
that's a good point.
If I may comment as well. I liken it to smart shaming. Sometimes you don't really know how much political capital you're going to be using. I'm a bureaucrat. I'm a service bureaucrat from the DSWD before. That was my first work in Ateneo. And of course, I got those dubious stirs that why are you here? Why are you in Makati? You're from Ateneo. What are you doing here? So, you know, you obviously get those, you know, it's not hate, but, you know, it just comes with the label, di ba? So parang nandun po ako sa tension that time na, okay, I try to do my best, but if you just look at my last name and where I graduated from, that totally defeats the purpose of how genuine I'm trying to be. So parang it's always a constant tension to distance oneself. No, I'm here on my own merit, and I'm trying to work my way up as a service bureaucrat, not using any political capital at all. So that's the nature po nung tanong ko po. Kaya ko lang po. That's why I wanted to put it forward. So, and you shed really good light on it, and I appreciate it. Thank you, JC, for giving me the opportunity to ask and comment.
Thank you, James. Okay, I think we have time for just one more question. I'll read this one from Aya, directed to Julia. Looking back, what is the most significant moment in your experience that reminded you why you joined the government? Parang you were reminded na, ito yun. This is why I'm here. Julia?
Sorry, can you say that again? You broke.
Ito, ang tanong niya ay, what is the most significant moment in your experience in government that reminded you why you joined government in the first place? Parang you were reminded na, ito yun, this is why I'm here.
Actually, a lot. There were some milestone moments. I guess you would count among them when we signed some important pieces of work. So reproductive health, that was one. The peace agreement, that was another. And then I think there was also one time I attended a change of command ng Armed Forces Chief of Staff, in both the incoming and outgoing chiefs of staff had highlighted in their speeches what the AFP had done in terms of human rights and peace. And I thought, wow, you know, you come into government and you attend an AFP event, and the highlight of the conversation is human rights and peace. And it's like, yeah, that's what you joined government.
Nice, nice. Okay, I think we can end there. Thank you so much, Julia, for sharing your thoughts on your personal crossover journey. And I'm sure maraming nakuha yung ating participants. Ayan. Ayan, thank you, Julia. So, just as a summary, nung ilan sa mga key points, gusto ko yung sinabi ni Julia na government is in many ways really a force for good eh. Pero you can look at it as a force for good or a force for bad eh, depending on how you use it, how you marshal the resources that are available to you once you are in government. Pero it is an opportunity to drive change. Iba parang it constrains us in a way, pero at the same time we can do a lot of good when we are in government and we use our resources to their full potential. So thank you, Julia, for reminding us of that. Okay, so we will now be proceeding with our breakout session. Okay, so let me just first introduce some of the facilitators and resource persons for every breakout room. Starting with, ayan, si Shibina Alcacir, gender reform consultant and the former executive assistant at the Office of the Presidential Advisor on the Peace Process. And next we have Nelly Beth Mercado, Regional Program Coordinator of the Conditional Cash Transfer Program of the Department of Social Welfare and Development, or DSWD. And then we have si Diana Katrina Fontamillas, Gender Reform Consultant and former Senior Planning Officer at the Commission on Human Rights. So Shabina, Nelly Beth, and Diana will be the facilitators for the gender breakout session. And next we have, next social protection. So we have 3 facilitators as well, starting with Maria Fe Mejia, Program Associate of UN Women and former Chief as Administrative Officer at the Department of Social Welfare and Development. And then we have Miguel Mantarin, Medical Officer 4 of the Health Promotions Bureau of the Department of Health and former Doctor to the Barrios at Batanes Province. And finally, we have Haya Bendanya, a collective impact organizer of We Solve Incorporated and former humanitarian worker at the Jesuit Refugee Services. So they will be the facilitators for social protection. And then finally, we have another breakout session for the security sector led by Kathleen Ann Tolosa, Senior Program Officer of the Asia Foundation and former Senior Analyst at the Armed Forces of the Philippines. And then we also have Marian Pio Ching, Political Affairs Officer, Office of the Minority Floor Leader of the Bangsamoro Parliament and former Senior Reporting Assistant at the UN Refugee Agency. And then finally, we have Jera May Anglo, Assistant Program Officer of the Asia Foundation and former Technical Assistant at the League of Cities of the Philippines. So they will be the facilitators for the security sector breakout session. So before we go to our respective breakout sessions, according to what you want, let me just lay down some of the guidelines for the breakout sessions. Participants shall be assigned to breakout rooms, and each breakout room will be assigned 1 facilitator and 2 resource persons. The session has 2 objectives. 1, to share respective crossover experiences of resource persons and participants, and based on the crossovers, CSO and government experience, brainstorm strategies and skills that can be applied in reform initiatives. And to anchor the discussion, the participants shall focus on challenges, skills, and strategies applicable to reform initiatives that impact the youth. The breakout sessions will be recorded by the organizers for documentation purposes, and recorded material will not be used by the organizers for public collateral without the consent of participants, and active participation will enrich the discussions. Let's listen with an open mind and provide inputs with kindness and respect. Okay, so I guess we can, with that in mind, we can now move on to our breakout rooms. I think open na ba sila? Ayan, so the breakout rooms are in progress. So feel free to go to the breakout session that you want to join. And we'll come back here for a closing plenary where we can share our discussions from the breakout sessions. Ayan, hello everyone. Welcome ulit dun sa ating main meeting room. And sorry kung na-delay yung social protection, sila ang record breaker sa pinakamatagal na breakout session. Na-carried away ang discussions doon. Pero sige, siguro we can hear, hindi, okay lang yun, walang problema. Actually, ang sobrang interesting nga parang gusto pa natin ng isang oras ulit dun sa discussion. Pero sige, let's hear from each of the breakout rooms from the facilitator. Sobrang from the discussions that I got to observe, sobrang rich ng discussions. At mukhang kulang talaga tong ating time. Mukhang marami pa tayong discussions na magaganap later on. Pero sige, let's hear brief summaries of the breakout sessions from the facilitators. Siguro simulan natin sa social protection. Si Haya ang facilitator doon.
Parang daming nangyari, pero sige, quick summary. So, ang daming paghihirap at isa sa mga paghihirap ay iba-iba yung opportunities from the urban youth to the rural poor youth. Sobrang iba-iba yung opportunities. So the chance for people with lived experiences to also advocate for their rights and advocate for the rights of their communities are difficult. And sometimes naaasa at wala naman kasi sila ibang choice, wala silang access. Minsan parang nakasalalay sa mga meron ng pribilehiyo, na meron ng mga access, na nasa circles na ng government recruitment, for example. So isa siya sa mga pinakamahirap. Yung pangalawang challenge ay mahirap baguhin yung mga pananaw systematically naka-impose na sa institutions natin. At kasama doon, when it comes to social protection, yung parang kapag nagbibigay ka ng pera, automatically ayuda para sa mga quote-unquote tamad. When in fact, parang it's not because they're lazy, it's because there are a lot of things that the poor needs right now, especially during the pandemic. And siguro on the latter level, on the parang what needs to change para maayos ang mga ganap natin sa buhay, sobrang dami. Isa sa mga lumabas yung better pay. Kasi ang hirap, ako yung nag-share nito parang minsan kung galing ka sa isang, kung galing ka sa urban poor or scholar ka buong buhay mo, parang mas nakaka-entice talaga sumali sa corporation sa sobrang mas malaki, significantly yung bayad as compared to NGOs and government work. So what happens is we create a culture and an environment where those with privilege or those who can afford to work and serve for these institutions are the ones who are there, and those with lived experiences who can better advocate for the rights of their communities are forced out of the system because of the pay. Pangalawa, si Jelly nagsabi nito, parang data. Sobrang kulang ng access ng datos at we can better govern when there is data. And dalawa rin yung nagsabi ng better integration sa work ng mga tao kasi parang lahat nasa silos. At uso din to minsan sa government yung bida-bida leadership na parang yung agency ko yung magaling, yung team ko yung magaling, instead of parang different teams working together. And we see this not only because in executive offices, but also because our politicians are sometimes parang binabrand nila as their initiative, ang initiative na jointly ginagawa ng mga sektor, ng NGOs, etc. So I think that summarizes the long discussion namin. But yeah, thanks kay JC.
Thanks, Haya. Marami pang susunod yan, I'm sure. Sige, let's hear from the other breakout sessions. Do sa gender, I think si Vance yata yung facilitator doon. Go ahead, Vance.
Hi, JC. Ayun, siguro pagdating sa mga issues of young people and gender, kasama talaga dito, kumbaga overall, yung making sure they are healthy and keeping them at school, no? Lalo na with the experience of sila Miss Beth with TAWID. Pero ang mga nakaka-impair nito or nagiging hadlang kasi yung adolescent pregnancy, child marriage, especially with our sisters in BARM, the safe spaces, and then sinama na din namin yung SOGI and expanded maternity leave. But when in terms of the challenges, matindi talaga yung challenge in advocating for reforms pagdating sa gender and young people. Kasi alam natin, very controversial, lalo na with very heavily religious and traditional yung ating mga leaders influenced by the big religious groups, 'di ba? So medyo malaking factor 'yon kung bakit hindi napapasa yung mga reform natin. Pero bukod doon, overall talaga ang agreement namin, unfortunately, talagang sidelined and taken for granted ang issue ng gender, 'di ba? Kumbaga, hindi yan important kasi mas madaming mga mas crucial na dapat unahin. And then, syempre, yung pandemic, tapos lalo na yung educational system natin, both for young people and even parang halimbawa in terms of convincing parents for parental consent for our reproductive health commodities. Parang matindi talaga yung work na kailangang ma-change for behavioral and cultural change in our country. But in terms of strategies, madami namang mga nalista na strategies. Sorry, I forgot to mention na mahalaga that we think about the people we wish to help para dun sa ating transformative reform, and noting that it's very intersectional. Hanapin yung gendered vulnerabilities and nag-intertwine kasi yung issues di ba? Economic, social, tapos yung SRHR and other rights, di ba? So pagdating sa ating strategies, mahalaga na i-note na important yung role ng kabataan, lalo na kung sila kanila lang issue naman to, so dapat sila yung nasa center ng advocacy. Napansin din ng mga medyo mas senior sa meeting, sa breakout session namin, na effective yung working with young people in terms of reform kasi they are very vibrant, walang pagod, hindi ko mag-agree tayo dito, enthusiastic, madaming ideas, and very loud and brave daw yung mga kabataan. So mahalaga that they are parang huge part of the reform work that we do. Make sure we have good relationship with gatekeepers, have people on the inside to help you. Political mapping and the political terrain for timing is very important. Mainstreaming gender in all components, not just in obviously gendered issues, but incorporating it in everything that we do. Sabi din ni Miss Beth, no, kailangan perspective-driven tayo, that people should want it. Mahalaga yung buy-in ng mga tao. And let us be more purposive with our advocacies. Clear yung goals natin. Let's enjoy the ride. The work is tough, but it is possible. The work is tough, but so are we, sabi nga nila, DK and Miss Beth. So we have to fight for the long haul. Kung hindi natin kaya ngayon, we need to ensure that we have champions on the inside. Mahalaga na yung biases of people in power is very important, no? Na-realize natin personal is political. Kaya mahalaga that we have champions inside, hindi lang sa mga higher ups, but pati yung mga actual staff, di ba? Kasi sila naman yung mga magda-draft yan at makakatulong sa'yo in terms of strategy. Very important, have more young people in government and be involved in politics, and we have to elect better leaders para ma-ensure na yung mga reform natin ay ma-push. Yun lang. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Vance. And last but not the least, yung sa security sector, I think si Jera yung facilitator doon. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. So yung sa discussion namin with the security sector, kami ata yung pinakamaliit na number. Kasi dun sa discussion namin, when you think about security, bakit hindi mo naman iisipin na public service yan as what one of our resource person emphasized. Pero marami po kasing maraming dimensyon ng security na security na pwede nating gawing reform. So yung discussion namin revolves around yung ano yung mga naging experience ng mga participants in crossing over from government to the CSO or CSO to government. So isa-isay natin para ma-shoutout naman natin yung mga participants natin. So ang sabi ni Airy, yung experience niya is one word, contradiction. Tapos my experience, describe ko is overwhelming. For James, it's humbling. For Kat, it's educational. For Edward, it's challenging. And for Fahad, it's exciting. Jello, adaptation. And lastly, for Jenny, is confining. But doon marami din na-share yung mga yung mga resource person namin when you want to work with the security sector. One is you need, especially as kasi meron dun sa plenary kasi namin ay sa breakout session namin, BARM and security. So as shared by Airy, kailangan you have to earn the trust of the people that you're working for and you're working with. You need to learn their history. It's very important. And their Islamic faith. And also with security lens, sinasabi natin na kailangan alam mo yung pag nagkatrabaho ka sa security sector, kailangan alam mo yung lenting bit-bit mo kasi yung pag sinabi mong enemy of the state, sino ba nagbibigay ng ano diyan, ng definition ng state, ng enemy? Pero once you unpack kung ano bang ibig sabihin na when you're working with the security sector, very important talaga na bit-bit mo yung lente mo para makapaggawa ka ng ma-push mo yung reform mo within. So also sinasabi din namin na sa sharing din namin, you have to be open to changes, especially if you're working, if you're not a member of the more people and you want to work with them, you have to open to changes. You have to kailangan malawak yung pag-intindi mo ng kultura nila, ng relihiyon nila para ma-push mo yung reform mo. And to summarize with all, parang sinasabi din namin na kahit saan ka magpunta, lagi mong tatandaan na yung trabaho mo kailangan na ma-manifest na nagtatranslate siya, na mapabuti yung buhay ng komunidad. So, yun lang po. Yun lang. So, kung may share yung mga members namin, feel free po. Thank you.
Thank you, Jera. Sobrang rich and diverse nung experiences natin. Sabi nga ni Jera, some people find government service educational, humbling, and in some instances, traumatic pa nga eh. Meron yung term na doon sa social protection group na vicarious trauma na maaaring umabot sa ganun yung experience mo sa government. And isa pa doon yung very overwhelming din sometimes yung diversity ng issues na tinatackle natin at gusto nating ireforma at tulad ng nabanggit ay intersectional din ang mga yun, so sobrang complex na mga problema. On top of that, meron yung systematic constraints dun sa institutions. Ang daming resistance not just from within government itself but also yung certain powerful stakeholders na paano na nag-o-oppose sa mga reforms na gusto nating i-push. And nabanggit din yung kakulangan ng pay for NGO workers, CSO workers na kailangan medyo taasan din somehow to the extent possible para mas marami pang maengganyo to engage in these activities sa reform natin. And gusto ko rin yung nabanggit na always think of stakeholders kasi at the end of the day, sila naman talaga yung gusto nating mapabuti yung kanilang buhay. Parang that's what keeps the flame burning when we are in government. And yung power of the youth in government, we need to encourage more youth join government. Nandun yung energy, yung enthusiasm, yung idealism, and we need to nurture that. And finally, I think importante din yung nabanggit na elect better people in government. So we have that chance in 2022. And importante yun kasi sila yung nagdidikta nung paano ba ka-resistant or gaano ka amenable yung gobyerno sa mga reforms na gusto natin. So I think that's a crucial aspect of the work we do. Okay, so before we end, siguro we can hear final thoughts, closing remarks mula kay Laila Deles, chairperson ng Young Public Servants. Go ahead, Laila.
Hello. Yes, okay, there. Thank you, JC, at magandang hapon sa inyong lahat. When we were just setting up YPS in 2008 and we were thinking of a name, Young Public Servants was what came to mind because we believe that anyone, regardless of their field and whether in public or private sector, had the capacity for public service in the sense that becoming an active, responsible citizen and taking part in the democratic processes was already a form of public service. This afternoon, we focused on the more formal forms of public service by listening to the journeys and experiences of those who took on the challenge of crossing over from civil society to government, coming from different backgrounds at different points in their careers, some deliberate, some by chance, some have remained in government, others have returned to the private sector, while others have crossed over several times. But underlying it all is the desire to continue to work for positive change and transformation. Today, there is a love-hate relationship between CSOs and government. Strong partnerships have enhanced the implementation of government programs, but at the same time, opposing views have led to frustrations and disappointments. Nonetheless, the openness, the willingness to listen, and to engage between both parties is an important dynamic that we must nourish to keep the balance in service in nation building. The upcoming 2022 elections presents another opportunity to make lasting change by becoming a part of the new administration, whether in elective or appointive positions. We hope that today's session inspired more young professionals to step up to the challenge of doing reform work within government. The challenge will be more difficult given the damage to the democratic institutions in the last 6 years and requires the careful rebuilding of accountable systems and institutions, as well as ensuring that those who have suffered most from the neglect of government will feel that they are the heart and center of governance reform and transformation. And for those who opt to stay in the CSO world, we hope that you are able to gain insights on how to engage constructively with government, as the work of nation building will have to take place on both sides of the governance divide. We trust that come 2022, it will be another blossoming of young leaders in all levels and avenues of public service. Maraming salamat uli sa lahat ng nag-participate ngayong hapon, sa resource persons, facilitators, speakers. Nakasama ako dun sa security session, tsaka sobrang rich ng discussion. So, sana nga mapatuloy natin ito. We are also thankful to, as part of this session, we will also be producing some videos and a report. So, abangan nyo po yon and ilalagay po namin yun sa YPS Facebook page. We are also grateful to the World Movement for Democracy for providing us this opportunity, and we hope that this is just the beginning. Sabi nyo nga, bitin. So we hope that we can continue to organize these types of conversations and maybe even other activities that will help us to further support the young members of civil society who are entering government. So maraming salamat uli, and I hope you all have a good rest of your weekend.
Okay, thank you, Laila, very much for those words. And on that note, we can end today's program. Maraming salamat sa lahat ng umattend sa TUWID Initiative Reforms from Within. Doon sa mga nag-share ng mga dating nasa gobyerno or currently nasa gobyerno ng kanilang crossover experience, yung mga challenges that they faced. And salamat din doon sa mga nasa civil society organizations na nakinig at sana ay ma-inspire din kayo na pumasok sa gobyerno at some point, especially next year we might have that good chance to serve together in government again. I think maganda yung sinabi din ni Julia kanina, no, na yung gobyerno actually is a force for good if you think of it, if you know how to marshal government resources and use those for public welfare. And here's hoping na marami sa mga advocacies ang mapupush at ma-institute, especially pag mas marami pang mga young people ang pumasok sa gobyerno, especially do sa paparating na political transition. Maraming salamat ulit sa inyong lahat. I'm sure maraming nabitin, and tulad nung sinabi ni Laila ay start lang to ng conversations natin, and it's gratifying to see na marami tayong mga like-minded people who are still passionate in serving the people in whatever capacity we can. So ipagpatuloy natin guys yung discussions, and let's keep in touch, and thank you everyone, and keep safe. Maraming salamat.